Macbeth, Act 2, Scene 2. This is the scene of Duncan's murder, but it may come as a surprise to a first-time reader or a first-time audience member that the murder of Duncan is not actually shown on stage. The reason for this is because at the time Shakespeare was writing, it would have been considered far too shocking to show the murder of a king on stage. Although this is a work of fiction, we have to remember that there was still that belief that the king was God's representative on earth. There was this belief in the divine right of kings, and even to show the murder of a good king on stage would have just been seen as far too shocking, which is why we, the audience, actually stay with Lady Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth gives us something of a commentary on what's going on, rather than us actually seeing the murder of the king on stage. So we're still in Macbeth's castle, and Lady Macbeth enters the scene on her own, and she says this: "That which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. What hath quenched them hath given me fire." Now she's talking about the guards, the chamberlains outside Duncan's chamber here. Remember that Lady Macbeth's part in this plot was to get the guards so drunk that they would pass out, and then Macbeth would have an easy access to Duncan's chamber where he's sleeping. And she's celebrating here the fact that she has been successful in that stage of the plan. They are completely drunk. And one of the things that she's had to do in order to make the whole thing look convincing is she's had to play along with it, and she's had a bit of alcohol as well. Hence, that which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. So she is feeling very, very, in her words, bold, courageous, brave as a result of the alcohol that she has been drinking. What hath quenched them, in other words, they've drunk so much that they've passed out, hath given me fire. Now, she comes onto the stage full of courage and determination, or so it seems. Once again, things are not quite as they seem. She is boasting about feeling confident and bold. But notice that there's a stage direction that comes next. An owl shrieks, and Lady Macbeth's response is, "Hark, peace!" Oh, it was the owl that shrieked, the fatal bellman which gives the sternest good night. Now, even today, some people are superstitious about owls, because owls, being a nocturnal bird, a bird of the night, are again, like the raven, which was mentioned earlier in the play, seen as omens or symbols of evil. It's highly appropriate, of course, that in the scene where a great act of evil is taking place, that we have the presence of an owl. But the point I really wanted to make here is Lady Macbeth comes onto the stage full of boasts, seemingly courageous, and yet she jumps, she is startled when she hears the owl shriek in the night. So she's actually very on edge. She's very stressed because, of course, if this deed is discovered, if they're caught in the act, then both she and her husband would be executed for treason. So she is actually far more stressed and far less confident than she at first appears. She is startled by the shriek of the owl. She calls the owl the fatal bellman, which gives the sternest good night. That idea of the fatal bellman, the idea of being like a night watchman, and the word fatal connects with this idea of an owl being seen as a bird of death and ill omen. Then we have one of the greatest understated lines in the play. Lady Macbeth says to the audience, "He is about it." It's a line that you could so easily overlook, but it is the line that tells us, the audience, that as Lady Macbeth is speaking, Macbeth is now in Duncan's chamber murdering the king. He is about it. The doors are open. and the surfeited grooms do mock their charge with snores. So the doors of Duncan's chamber are open. If you are surfeited, it means you've had enough of something. The grooms, of course, are the guards on the chamber. They are so full, satisfied with alcohol, that they're making a mockery of their duty, which is to protect the king, because at this very moment they are unconscious, passed out with so much drink. Notice that Lady Macbeth is taking no chances. Not only has she got them incredibly drunk, she says next, "I have drugged their possets." So she's put some sort of drug, probably some sort of sleeping draught, into the wine or whatever it is that they've been drinking to make sure that they fall unconscious. She says next, "I have drugged their possets that death and nature do contend about them, whether they live or die." So they're so unconscious that they actually look dead, and if you were to look at them, you wouldn't know whether or not they were dead or alive. That's how unconscious they are as a result of the alcohol and this drug which she says that she's put into the drinks, the possets. At this point we are told, with the significant stage direction, "Enter Macbeth with 2 bloody daggers." Now, the careful audience member, the attentive audience member, the careful student, which of course you are, will notice that this stage direction is actually rather significant. Because if you remember, the plan was that when Macbeth had murdered the king, he would plant the daggers on the 2 guards outside the chamber and smear them with blood. But Macbeth is so stressed and so distraught by what he's just done that he's actually made a mistake, and he's brought the daggers with him. He should have left them at the scene of the crime, but under duress he makes this mistake. At this point, however, although the audience can see Macbeth, Lady Macbeth can't see him, nor can he see her. This is another example of the darkness of the night obscuring what's going on. Macbeth cries out, "Who's there? What ho?" and we'll understand the significance of what he's shouting in a few lines' time. Lady Macbeth hears Macbeth call out, and she panics. "Alack, I am afraid that they have awaked, and 'tis not done." She thinks that Macbeth has cried out because the guards have regained consciousness and caught him in the act. That's what she means when she says, "I am afraid they have awaked, and 'tis not done." She's worried that the guards have woken up and caught Macbeth in the act. "The attempt and not the deed confounds us." This is a line which again confirms that Lady Macbeth fears that Macbeth has been discovered. So you can see already that the Lady Macbeth, the very calm, cool, ruthless and courageous Lady Macbeth of Act 1, is already starting to decline as a character. She came on at the beginning of this scene full of boasts of confidence, and now she's panicking. "Hark! I laid their daggers ready. He could not miss 'em." She thinks that maybe Macbeth hasn't found the murder weapons. Then, and this really is one of those lines that I would commit to memory because of what it tells us about Lady Macbeth's character. She says this: "Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it." So clearly what's happened? When Lady Macbeth has got the guards drunk and they've passed out, she's gone into Duncan's chamber to make sure that all is ready, to check that the king is sleeping in his bed and that the murder weapons are close by. She says that she was actually tempted to commit the murder there and then herself, but something stopped her. And what stopped her was that when she looked at the sleeping Duncan, he reminded her of her father. Now, the reason that this is such an important line is because this is the very first example in the play that we see a degree of weakness in Lady Macbeth's character. She Well, weakness as far as she is concerned. We would see it as a strength, but she sees it as a weakness. Remember that she is a woman who wants to be completely free of remorse and compassion. She wants to be ruthless and determined. And yet she cannot bring herself to murder Duncan, because when she looks at him sleeping, she's reminded of her father. So that tells us that there is a degree of compassion and sympathy and tenderness within Lady Macbeth. She is not as cruel and heartless and ruthless as she would like to be. But it is a really useful line when you consider the character of Lady Macbeth and the way in which that she is not exactly what she seems, and she's not what she wants to be. There is tenderness and softer emotions lurking under that facade of ruthlessness and evil. Macbeth comes towards Lady Macbeth. She sees him and she says, "My husband." Macbeth replies, "I have done the deed." Notice how, again, Macbeth can't actually bring himself to use the word murder. He uses the euphemism the deed. Either way, that line tells us that Duncan is now dead. Macbeth has carried out the murder. He asks his wife, "Didst thou not hear a noise?" She replies, "I heard the owls scream and the crickets cry. Did not you speak?" Now notice in these next 4 lines there's a really quick interchange of lines, and this is helping to build up this sense of tension, whether or not Macbeth and Lady Macbeth might be discovered in their act of murder, and it shows just how on edge they are. Lady Macbeth has just asked, "Did you not speak?" Macbeth replies, "When?" Lady Macbeth says, "Now." Macbeth says, "As I descended." Lady Macbeth replies, "Aye, yes." Macbeth says, "Hark, listen. Who lies in the second chamber?" The second chamber meaning the bedroom next door to Duncan's. Macbeth wants to know who's sleeping in there. Lady Macbeth replies, "Donalbain." Remember that Donalbain is Duncan's youngest son. Macbeth then turns his attention to the blood that he's covered with. Remember, he's just stabbed the king to death. It's an incredibly gory, brutal, violent way of killing somebody. He is covered in blood. And he takes a look at himself and he says, "This is a sorry sight. This is an awful sight. This is a miserable sight. This is a sight that should cause me to feel guilt." Lady Macbeth keeps up this facade of bravery and ruthlessness. She says to her husband, "A foolish thought to say a sorry sight. What a stupid thing to say. What a stupid thing to think. What a stupid thing to feel." Macbeth, in this next part of the play, is describing to Lady Macbeth what he heard while he was in Duncan's chamber. "There's one that did laugh in sleep, and one cried, 'Murder!' that they did wake each other. I stood and heard them, but they did say their prayers and address them again to sleep." To which Lady Macbeth replies, "There are 2 lodged together." To explain what's going on here. When Macbeth was busy murdering Duncan, somebody in the next room cried out in their sleep, "Murder." So much so that the 2 people sleeping in that room woke up. Now, the 2 people sleeping in that room, one of them is Donalbain. Lady Macbeth mentioned that. When she says there are 2 lodged together, she's also revealing that Malcolm, Duncan's elder son and the heir to the throne, remember, is also sleeping in that room. What Macbeth has done by murdering the king has gone against the natural order, so much so that it has disturbed the sleep of Malcolm and Donalbain. One of them, we don't know who, has had some sort of nightmare, like a premonition of evil, and has cried out murder in his sleep. The one who cries out has woken the other one, and both of them get out of bed and say their prayers. And Macbeth, busy murdering their father in the next room, hears them get out of bed and hears them say their prayers. That's one of the reasons why he's cried out, "Who's there? What ho?" He's been shocked and startled by what's going on. However, they've not heard him cry out. Fortunately, if you look at it that way, for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, they've been too busy saying their prayers. The fact that they say their prayers is important because, of course, they're turning to God, whilst unbeknownst to them, an act of great evil is going on in the room next door, in Duncan's bedroom. Macbeth carries on his commentary describing to Lady Macbeth what he's heard. "One cried, 'God bless us,' and 'Amen' the other, as they had seen me with these hangman's hands. Listening their fear, I could not say Amen when they did say, 'God bless us.'" So as part of their prayers, either Malcolm or Donalbain has said, "God bless us," and the other says, "Amen." Macbeth worries when he's in the chamber that he's actually been discovered. He says he thinks that he's been discovered when he says the line, "As they had seen me with these hangman's hands," as if they had seen me with these hangman's hands, as if they'd walked in and caught me in the deed of killing their father. One of the reasons that Shakespeare has Macbeth refer to him having hangman's hands. Of course, a hangman is somebody who carries out an execution, and in a way that is what Macbeth is doing here. He's executing Duncan. There's another reason why he describes himself as a hangman. You might think of hanging as an execution as quite a clean method of execution. It's not particularly bloody or gory, but at the time that Shakespeare was writing, and of course the death penalty would have been in place for a range of crimes, quite a few, once the criminal had been executed and hanged, the hangman would then disembowel the executed criminal, so would cut them open. Now we know that Macbeth knows how to cut open a body. Remember how he killed MacDonald, the way that we were told he killed MacDonald in Act 1, Scene 2. Remember, he's stabbing Duncan to death. This is a violent, visceral, brutal way of killing somebody. And so one of the reasons why he refers to himself as having hangman's hands is because he's cutting the body open in the same way that a hangman would disembowel an executed criminal after the execution had taken place. Another key point in this short speech of Macbeth's. Macbeth, remember, is a Christian. You might not think it, given what he's just done. But he is a Christian in a Christian kingdom. Remember, Shakespeare establishes that Scotland is a Christian kingdom with the reference to Golgotha, again in Act 1, Scene 2. Because Macbeth is a Christian, when he hears Malcolm and Donalbain praying next door, when one of them says, "God bless us," Macbeth's instinctive response is to reply, "Amen." But he tells Lady Macbeth that when he goes to say Amen instinctively, he could not say it. "I could not say Amen when they did say God bless us." Why is this so important? It's revealing the fact Shakespeare really is setting up this battle between good and evil in the play. Macbeth has just committed an evil, atrocious act. He's killed God's representative on earth, and so he's been abandoned by God. When he goes to say Amen, he cannot say it. He has committed an act of such evil that he's been abandoned by God. Lady Macbeth, in a very casual manner, mainly because it doesn't bother her, says to Macbeth, "Consider it not so deeply. Stop worrying so much about the fact that you couldn't say Amen. Who cares?" is basically what she's saying here. Consider it not so deeply. However, Macbeth is not so casual. He cannot let the matter drop. "But wherefore, why, could I not pronounce Amen? I had most need of blessing, and Amen stuck in my throat." So he's actually feeling really rather bothered and stressed about the fact that he could not say Amen. He wants to know why He could not bring himself to say amen. He says that the very word amen stuck in my throat just at the moment when I needed blessing, in other words, forgiveness for what I had done. But of course, as he's been abandoned by God, he cannot receive that forgiveness. This, of course, is helping to demonstrate even further Macbeth's decline in character. However, I want to emphasize again at this point that Macbeth is not at all pleased with the fact that he's had to kill in cold blood. He's very, very uncomfortable with it. Remember, on the battlefield, he's got no problem with killing somebody brutally. But when it's in cold blood, when he's got no real reason to do it, at this stage in the play, it is still bothering him. More about that very shortly. Lady Macbeth, trying to ease Macbeth's troubled mind here, says to him, "These deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad. Look, you've done the deed now. You can't keep going over it in your mind. You mustn't think too deeply about what you've done, otherwise it will make us mad." Highly ironic line, this. The reason being, at the moment, Macbeth is deeply troubled by what he's done, and he is feeling a sense of guilt. As the play goes on, Macbeth is going to become more and more desensitized to cold-blooded killing and murder, whereas at the moment he's showing great remorse and guilt. On the other hand, Lady Macbeth, who at the moment is seeming very calm and casual about the whole thing, she is the one who, as the play goes on, is going to decline into madness as a result of the actions that they are performing in this scene. And so the fact that she says, "It will make us mad if we think about these things too deeply," in order to take her husband's mind off it, she is the one who is going to end up thinking about things too deeply and eventually being driven mad. Macbeth, still highly stressed by what he's done, is still reflecting on the fact that firstly he's not been able to say amen, and secondly that he's feeling so guilty that he believes he'll never be able to sleep again. This is what he says. "Methought I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more! Macbeth does murder sleep!' The innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care, the death of each day's life, sore labour's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast." Lady Macbeth can't get her head round exactly what Macbeth's going on about here. She says, "What do you mean?" Now, even in Shakespeare's time, people understood the benefit of sleep, not in the scientific way that we do today, but Macbeth lists here all of the benefits that you get from going to sleep that he now believes he will never be able to experience again, because he thinks that his conscience will be so troubled by what he's done that he'll never ever be able to enjoy innocent sleep, calm, relaxing, healthy, beneficial sleep. Lady Macbeth says, "What do you mean?" And he replies, "Still it cried, 'Sleep no more,' to all the house. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more." But as I've already alluded, Macbeth is going to become much easier in his own mind about the murder that he's just committed. He may be stressed and guilt-ridden at the moment, but that's not always going to be the case. Lady Macbeth is struggling to understand, in a way, what Macbeth is going on about here. He's becoming and behaving in an almost delirious manner, and she's trying to calm him down. "Who was it that thus cried? Who was this voice that you think cried out, 'Sleep no more,' and that Macbeth has murdered sleep?" Of course, what's actually happened is that Macbeth has only imagined the voice which has cried, "Macbeth shall sleep no more." Nobody in the chamber next door shouted it. That bit has been in Macbeth's mind. And so Lady Macbeth is trying to get him to pull himself together and calm down. "Who was it that thus cried? Why, worthy Thane, you do unbend your noble strength to think so brain-sickly of things." Ironic again that she should describe this idea of being brain-sickly, because that's what she will become later in the play. Trying to take charge of the situation and do something practical in order to calm Macbeth down, she says, "Go get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hand. Go and get some water and wash the blood away." There's no stage direction here, but the language, what Lady Macbeth says, clearly states that for the first time she's noticed the mistake that Macbeth has made by bringing the daggers from the scene of the crime. She says to him, "Why did you bring these daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go, carry them and smear the sleepy grooms with blood." Notice how once again she's taking charge of the situation. Her husband's going to pieces in front of her eyes. She is having to take charge. She's giving commands. She's questioning some of his actions. And she's telling him, "Go back to Duncan's chamber and plant the daggers and smear the guards with blood." What Macbeth says next is rather significant. "I'll go no more. I am afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not." As we know, Macbeth is not squeamish. He's not a man who is frightened of blood and gore. He is the same man who in Act 1, Scene 2 unseamed MacDonald from the nave to the chaps and then cut his head off. This is the same man whose sword, we are told, smoked with bloody execution on the battlefield. Macbeth is not frightened of what violent death looks like. But once again, violent death on the battlefield when you are serving your king is very different from the violent death of cold-blooded murder. Macbeth cannot bring himself to go back to Duncan's room to plant the daggers because he does not want to look at the gory mess that he's made of this saintly king. Look on it again, I dare not, he says. Lady Macbeth, having to do something to take charge of the situation here for fear that they'll be discovered, says to Macbeth, infirm of purpose. This is the second time in the play that she's called him a coward. That's what infirm of purpose means. Give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt. And off she goes. Lady Macbeth takes the daggers from Macbeth and goes back to plant them herself and smear the grooms, the guards, with blood. She is having to take control of the situation because Macbeth has refused to go back. Now, really important point coming up here. Lady Macbeth is someone who has never seen violent death. She does not really know what it looks like. She's never fought on a battlefield, and she's certainly never killed anybody in cold blood. She makes a mistake here, and it's going to cost her. Bear with me and I'll explain why. She says to Macbeth that he's a coward for not wanting to go back into Duncan's chamber, because in her mind, the sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. What she means by this is, why are you so frightened to go back into the room of the murder? A dead person looks just like a sleeping person. There's no difference between them. That shows just how naive and ignorant she is about violent death. Remember, Shakespeare has already used language to convey the violence that has taken place in Duncan's bedroom. He's been stabbed to death, there's blood all over the place, Macbeth has disemboweled him, cut out his guts with the dagger. And yet Lady Macbeth is saying there's no difference between a dead person and a sleeping person. She doesn't know what she's walking into. She does not know the violent, gory scene that she's about to witness. And this is going to come back to haunt her. The reason I say this, and this is one of those evaluative points and one of those analytical points that I really would advise you pay close attention to, because remember that in your exam, you have to show your understanding of the play as a whole and how events are connected. This is the point in the play that I would suggest Lady Macbeth's decline into madness begins. In Act 5, Scene 1, I know I'm leaping ahead here, but I need to in order for you to understand. In Act 5, Scene 1, the first scene of the final act of the play, that is the sleepwalking scene in which we, the audience, witness Lady Macbeth's madness. When she is sleepwalking, she talks about a number of things which are then overheard by a doctor who's watching her. A number of things are said by her that not only reveal what's happened and that she knows about the murder of Duncan and Banquo and other murders, she's also reliving some of her own experiences. And one of the things that she quotes is this: "Who would have thought that the old man would have had so much blood in him?" The old man meaning Duncan. When she is sleepwalking in Act 5, the image, the violent image of what she sees in Duncan's chamber on the night of the murder comes back to haunt her. And that line from Act 5, Scene 1, "Who would have thought the old man would have had so much blood in him?" proves to me that when she goes into Duncan's chamber to plant the daggers, she is so horrified by what she sees that her mental decline begins. In many of the best productions of Macbeth, the actress playing Lady Macbeth, when she comes back from planting the daggers, and we'll look at this in a minute, she should look completely shell-shocked, horrified, pale and sick, covered in blood, because she has underestimated the scene that she's walking into. Her naivety and ignorance makes her say to Macbeth, "Why are you frightened of the dead when they just look like somebody sleeping?" And yet she goes into this chamber, sees the gore and the blood and the violence, and that's where her mental decline begins. We'll talk more about that, of course, when we get to Act 5, Scene 1, and also in a few lines' time as well. So, off Lady Macbeth goes to plant the daggers, and we're told that there is a knock, and this knock is coming from the gates of the south entry to Macbeth's castle. Macbeth is startled by the knocking. "Whence is that knocking? How is't with me when every noise appalls me?" Macbeth is so on edge that he's been startled by the sound of the knocking. He turns his attention, however, back to his hands. Remember, they're covered in blood. "What hands are here? Ha! They pluck out mine eyes. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No. This my hand will rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red." Now, don't be put off by the metaphor and the language here. Macbeth is talking metaphorically. Remember, he is feeling incredibly guilty for what he's just done. And his hands are covered in the blood, this symbol of the murder that he's just committed. At this point, it's not just symbolic, it's there, it's literal. He is covered in blood. But this blood also represents his guilt and his remorse. And what he's saying here is that he could wash his hands in the ocean, and he still would not be able to get all the blood off. In other words, he could wash his hands in the ocean, but it still wouldn't really wash away the stain of the guilt and the stain of the sin which is now on his conscience. He talks about the multitudinous seas becoming incarnadine when he washes his hands in them. Incarnadine is just another word for red. It's like he's saying, I've got so much blood on my hands, literally and metaphorically, that if I were to go to the ocean and wash my hands in it, there is so much blood on my hands that the green sea would turn red. Lady Macbeth comes back. Now, as I said earlier, a really good director and a really good actress playing Lady Macbeth would convey the shock. Not through the words, because, as we'll see in a minute, Lady Macbeth's words suggests that she's still putting on this facade of strength, but her face and the shock on it should tell a completely different story. But here she is, keeping that facade of being ruthless and in command. She says to her husband, "My hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white. Look, my hands are the same colour as yours because they're now covered in blood. My hands are red too. But I would feel so ashamed if my heart was as white as yours." Remember that in literature, colour is often used symbolically and metaphorically, and white is often the colour associated with innocence and purity. Remember that innocence and purity are things that Lady Macbeth sees as weaknesses. That's why she says that she would feel ashamed to have a heart so pure as Macbeth's. Of course, Macbeth's heart isn't pure. He's just committed a terrible sin. White as well is the colour of surrender and cowardice. So if you interpret it that way, she is saying once again that she would be ashamed to act in as cowardly a manner as her husband. Again, when you think about it, this is incredibly harsh. Macbeth has done what she persuaded him to do. He's actually been the one to get his hands literally dirty by killing Duncan, and now she's calling her husband a coward because he wouldn't go back and plant the daggers. There is another knock on the gate. Lady Macbeth says, "I hear a knocking at the south entry. Retire we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed. How easy is it then? Your constancy hath left you unattended." She says to Macbeth, "Right, I can hear this knocking. We need to get back to our chamber, our bedroom, so that we can get ourselves cleaned up." This is another highly ironic line which I would commit to memory. A little water clears us of this deed. How easy is it then? This line is ironic because water will indeed wash away the blood and make them seem innocent of Duncan's murder. But what isn't so easy to wash away is the metaphorical blood, the blood that stains the conscience, the blood that causes this sense of remorse and guilt. So yes, the water will wash away the actual blood, but it won't wash away the guilt, the remorse, and the stain of sin, which will ultimately result in Lady Macbeth's decline and madness. So it's a highly ironic line from her at this stage. There's another knock from the gate. Lady Macbeth says, "Hark, listen, more knocking. Get on your nightgown, lest occasion call us and show us to be watchers. Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts." Once again, she's saying to Macbeth, pull yourself together. Stop thinking about this so deeply. Get your pyjamas on. That's what she's saying when she says, get on your nightgown. Because when the murder's discovered, we mustn't be found to be up and about. We've got to pretend that we've just got up and are shocked by the murder when it's discovered. Once again, she's encouraging deceit. She's encouraging this idea of putting on a facade so that the truth is hidden behind this facade of lies. Macbeth says, "To know my deed, 'twere best not know myself." This is another of those lines that conveys Macbeth's guilt. He wants to try to forget what he's done. There's another knock at the gate. And remember what I've said. Macbeth, later in the play, is going to become desensitized to cold-blooded murder and violence done in cold blood. But at the end of Act 2, Scene 2, the murder scene, the lines that end this scene demonstrate that at this point, Macbeth regrets what he's done. In response to the sound of the knocking, he says, "Wake Duncan with thy knocking. I would thou couldst. I only wish that you could wake up Duncan with the sound of the knocking." Lines which convey regret and remorse. Macbeth, at this point in the play, wishes that he had not killed Duncan. In the next scene, Act 2, Scene 3, we're introduced to the character of Macduff, who's going to play a vital role later on in the play, and it's the scene in which Duncan's murder is discovered. So join me next time and we'll have an in-depth look at that crucial scene.